Stenemo, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So today it is episode 5, or rather this week is episode 5. And I think we should talk about something that is very common, at least in Sweden, to talk about. I believe there are in many other places as well. Work-life balance. What comes to your mind when I say these words?
For me, work-life balance is such a commonly used phrase that has so many different meanings. But for me, the meaning is that when other people say it, it's basically thinking of work as something that they are doing too much and that is stressing them every hour of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I hear this work-life balance, it seems like, okay, work is something that is both artificial, some drudgery, something that you have to do, but you don't want to, if you want to put your soul in it, rather you want to spend time elsewhere. And maybe it has some historical background to it, for instance, like in the industrial area. Do you think it could be such a case for it?
Yes, it's the common 8-hour workday is basically from a movement where they said that we should have half the day working rather than having even more. So it used to be that 8-hour workday was considered a short time to work per day.
Yeah, exactly. But then I also heard like petitions for 6-hour work days, yes, or 4-hour work days, or even 4-hour work weeks. So yeah, I guess it has been a little bit more flexible. And then we have some extremes other ends, for instance, like 60-hour work weeks or 80, or I believe Elon Musk is advocating for 100-hour work weeks. So my point is that the work-life balance could be very different depending on person and depending on circumstance, probably depending on context as well. And I think you're pretty much in agreement on that point.
Yeah, very much so.
So I first want to mention my own work-life balance, and then we're going to transition over to you because from what I've heard, you have a pretty interesting and probably very aspirational way to incorporate work, or rather lack of work, depending on how you define it, which is kind of a very problem as well. Because for me, it's very hard to define work. I mean, what is work really? Is it like you have to be in a certain place and then you check out at the end of the day, especially when you're in such a virtual environment and also doing freelance? So my trick is that work has become more and more flexible and also a little bit more non-distinguished from the actual life. So that is one reason why I don't think like work-life balance such a good metric to aspire for. And the other thing is like, okay, you have a life. So if you don't have a work-life balance, you have a work-death balance instead. you can pretty much hear the absurdity from there. So is it like doom scrolling or getting drunk or binge watching Netflix? Or I mean, yes, life to me sounds
it's hard to imagine a retired person saying that they need work-life balance.
Yeah, exactly. So I find it very interesting to basically lump together life and kind of get away with it, because once you really try to define how it would turn out for your case, I believe it's much more complicated than it. So do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it's a tricky term and it's very hard to actually get any clear progress on such a vague term.
Yeah, exactly. And I also want to mention as well that sometimes to be kind of perceived that I'm advocating for like work all the time, but that's not what I'm advocating, because I'm the last person to advocate for even 40-hour work weeks even. I believe that's something that should be, or rather, work shouldn't be limited to hours. It should rather be limited to something else or measured by something else. But that's a topic for another episode, how to basically make work result-oriented rather than more hours. But what I want to redefine work-life balance is some kind of like total life balance, because you have work, you have finances, fitness, you have hobbies, you have other personal interests, you have social life, stuff like that. All of these need to be balanced. So I believe that if you really want to instill some kind of balance in your life, then it's good to make sure, okay, what does my life contain? It could be work, sleep, it could be eating, it could be whatever guilty pleasure that's lurking around. So, and I believe it's important to have all of these in one particular place, in one particular document, maybe, for instance, areas document. And then you basically want to negotiate with yourself, like, okay, how much do you want to spend this? How much do you spend that? Both in terms of like time and and resources and money, etc. So I believe if you do that, then you get the work-life balance that the term work-life balance wants to achieve. But instead of being vague, you are instead being very specific. And I believe that whenever you're specific, you're one step closer to get to one. So do you have any comments?
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the first step is always to define the problem or the goal.
Yeah, exactly. So first the goal, and then have I would say, a very complete sense of current reality, what is actually going on, just like any consult for them or consulting firm for them, for that matter. So if someone asks me like, okay, how is your work-life balance? I would say, okay, I believe that all of the areas at the moment are purpose of what I want to achieve right now. But at the same time, I expect it change as life progresses and new opportunities go away, and some things that might not just 2 months before be more archived, so to speak. So I believe that's something you should review often and really think of yourself like, okay, I have my own work-life balance. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to like work 8 hours, spend 8 hours doing that, etc. That is something that I want to have my own sense balance. So that is a little bit of my rant on work-life balance, because I've been a little bit bogged, or rather, what can you say? I haven't really been a very huge fan of the term, so to speak. So do you have any comments about it, Stenemo?
No.
And then I want to transition over to you. How does your work-life balance look like?
So currently working full-time at the Karolinska Institute. But also working from home due to the pandemic still being in process. It's basically waking up and doing my morning routine that gets me in the state of mind where I want to work and feel energized. And then I work focus for basically 45 minutes. And then I take a break where I relax my mind and do something physical, not just sit around even further, since my work is basically sitting in front of a computer typing and a lot of mental processing. My breaks are some kind of physical exercise like VR or some other basic walking or simple exercise. And then back to work again for another 45-minute session, which is what works for me to somewhat quickly get into flow, where focus mode. And then after 45 minutes, my mental capacity goes down. So for me, the whole work-life balance, basically for the first 8-10 hours of the day, trying to be as productive as I can. But in order to do that, to have proper break, to call someone when I have a break and want to do some simple walking, then I can talk to someone and get a break. So the balance isn't really focusing on the hours or focusing on a specific target for work. It's more a case of with this limited time, how can I get enough rest to be productive during my working hours? And then after my working day, find some relaxing activity that's either social or good for my health, like badminton. So combining fun with health.
So if I count correctly, you have 2 sessions of 45 minutes, or have I missed some here and there?
So it's a case of having as many sessions as I can fit before lunch. And depending on the day, I have more or less sessions. And it also depends on what other things I need to fit into my life. So I try to not have a too rigid structure. If I have a important meeting early in the day, it doesn't influence my schedule that much.
All right. So it's more of an adaptive case, and see like, okay, this is a hard landscape. These are so many meetings, and based around how often or how early I woke up, this is how I'm going to spend the next 6 hours going forward.
Exactly.
So what I found very interesting with the detailed map of the day that you presented was the fact that all other activities, they weren't like in isolation. They were like in harmony with each other. And I believe that was something that our very own Jeff Bezos said once in an interview. Like, he prefers to talk about work-life harmony rather than work-life balance. And I believe what he meant by that is that whatever you do in your work is positively influencing all other aspects, and in return, all other aspects are influencing work. For instance, like badminton, rest, social. If I understand you correctly, Stenemo, I believe that all these other activities are making you better, stronger, more focused, more inspired when you actually sit time and do the flowy thing.
Yes, exactly. So basically, as Jeff Bezos said, that what happens outside of work will influence how you feel at work and how work will be for you. So making sure that you have a good situation outside of work is as important as having a good work structure.
Yeah, exactly. And since I'm employed at Amazon, Jeff Bezos has been on top of my mind quite a lot. But I believe believe like this term of synergy, which means like, okay, these different parts are affecting each other in the work cycle, is something that should strive to, rather than just like having this strict division of time allocated there, time allocated there. Because once you, and I guess there's some kind of second order question, like you have to ask yourself, okay, if I do this, how it is going to impact, for instance, my work, for instance, my relationship, stuff like that. So I guess that you have some kind of like ongoing review, either daily or weekly or monthly, in which you check and see like, okay, is there something that needs to be either improved or can it be as it is for now?
Yes, to some extent.
So one thing I want to talk to you as well about is the fact that basically work can be very different for many people. And it's, of course, so many factors that could depend on how you want to shape your work life. There could be people like work all the time, and there could be people that don't want to work at all. So where would you put yourself in that gradient, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that just as for most people, if I had a job where I thought this was meaningless work that isn't helping the world in any way, say that I was rolling a rock up a hill and just watching it roll down again, which is a famous story, Greek.
Sisyphus.
Yes, Greek story, the Sisyphus story. And if I had that kind of work, I would want to spend as little time thinking about it and as little time as possible improving my work or spending time at work. But at the moment, I'm very lucky to have work where I'm feeling very motivated, and I feel like I'm both feeling like I'm progressing, becoming better. I'm enjoying my social environment. I'm looking forward to actually seeing my colleagues in person. And there's a concept related to this called Ikigai, where if you have a job where you can both feel like you're helping the world in a significant way, and that you can feel like you're doing something that you're good at, and you can feel like you're getting some kind of appreciation, for example, having a salary that you feel is sufficient for you and shows that the progress you work making at work is making an impact. If you feel that all of those things are fulfilled, you can feel a sense of passion for your work, and that basically is summarized in this Japanese term, Ikigai. You can basically translate it as bliss.
Yeah.
So Ikigai means bliss.
So do you want to tell a little bit more about Ikigai? I've read the book at the Christmas break last year, but I believe that you can probably tell the audience about like the 4 buckets and how they influence each other.
Could you remind me about the 4 buckets?
Or maybe I'm mixing up with some other frameworks, but I believe that there's like, or maybe there are circles rather. For instance, like, okay, what you're good at, what the world needs from you, etc. So the more refined question would then be, what does Ikigai mean for you, and how do you strive to incorporate it in your daily experience?
Yes. So for me, I focus in work on how to feel Ikigai. It's basically thinking about this specific task that is in front of me right now. How is this a meaningful task? Even if it's a very simple task of just, now I need to check email and answer this email that doesn't seem to really be helping the world, then I can rephrase, I could think about it as something that I have to do, or I can think of it as something as I get to do. I get to be involved in the pursuit of knowledge in this field that I'm working in. So being a cancer researcher, even if it's a very basic email about a specific simple question about my research, it's still one small piece in the bigger progress towards studying cancer. So I can take the small piece, this email, and I can see the big picture and see that this is a meaningful task that I'm doing in order for my work to progress. Even if I'm just a small cog in this big machinery that is trying to make progress on this hard question, I'm still doing some research that no one else is doing. And if I'm lucky, I'm able to help other people in this field, and therefore I can see meaning in what I'm doing. And that's one of these circles in this Venn diagram, that is having meaning in all your tasks that you're doing. And then, of course, I might not feel like I'm the best at email, but I feel like I can learn how to do this good enough. So I can feel like I'm doing meaningful work. I'm progressing as I should expect. I don't have too high expectations, and I'm happy to make progress and celebrate my small progress. And then it's the case of feeling safe in my work, that my work is being appreciated, and I'm lucky to have colleagues that help me progress faster. So for me, it's quite easy to see that most of these are fulfilled. And it's a case of feeling that you're good at work. And I try to every time I'm doing the same task, trying to see how can I improve myself in doing this task better.
So if I understand correctly, there's a very big emphasis on the meaning and purpose when it comes to daily experience. Like, okay, you want to have all what you do as close to your inner like imagination, imaginary purpose as possible in order to feel this sense of Ikigai, if I understand correctly.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
So, and it was a little bit funny when you mentioned email there, because I believe that in order to be very good at email, you have to basically not do email so often, just as we mentioned in the last, I believe it was the second episode. But anyways, what I also found very interesting, what you just told, was the fact that you get to do it versus have to do it. And I've been toying around at the time of this recording with the idea to reframe obligations and option. And I don't mean like obligations is like slavery or stuff like that. Not slavery, but rather something that you have to do, although it is what this means. And options is more like something that might want to do if you want to. But what I want to come back to in this context is like, okay, instead of having to think like, okay, something I should do, I have to do, instead I can think like, okay, I'm the one that wants to do because of X, Y, Z, etc. So I believe just this mindset shift could have a very profound impact in whatever people are doing, I guess.
Yes.
So one thing that I also think is very important with Ikigai as well, that I feel like have such impact. Well, so there is both a purpose in a sense, but also that you get the feedback, like for instance, okay, this is what I'm actually achieving, and if I'm not, this is how I could be learning and progressing future as well. So I believe that there is some constant improvement as well, just like other Japanese framework, Kaizen, Lean, or Six Sigma, or other kind of stuff that we could go over in a future episode. But I want to lastly mention a little bit about, because I mentioned the gradient before, and that is probably not something that we can cover in full detail today, but probably in maybe next episode or the episode after that, we can go over a little bit more, because if people want to work as little as possible, they need to somehow have to make it work without having to basically not standing on their legs, financially speaking. And if I understand correctly, you are quite knowledgeable in how to make sure to live a life that you want while at the same time reducing the need for work. So could you tell me a little bit more about your views on and just very brief, because I know that you might want to elaborate it further, but just give us a little bit of an elevator pitch FIRE means to you.
Yes. So as you mentioned, I've been thinking about this quite some time, and I've been thinking that what I can do to enjoy life is basically to help others. And spending money on myself, I've realized, is a very inefficient way, both for me to enjoy life and for me to have meaning in life. So after a very small amount of spending for having a good place to stay, where I have a 2-room apartment, and I realized that if I have a good living room, I can sleep in that living room, I can have my breakfast in that living room, I can have dinner in that living room, I can work in that. So for me, I find that having one room where you can enjoy life is all I need. So before I even bought this apartment, I decided that I would be happy to help another person who wants the same thing. So I'm only using one of my rooms in my 2-room apartment and subletting that other room. And by doing that, I'm both helping someone who also wants to live quite minimalistic, and I'm also decreasing my housing expenses, which in Sweden is the biggest cost in life, apart from possibly food. And same thing goes with my transport to work, which now is basically non-existent. That I've always enjoyed biking, and I think having a car is quite pointless if you live in a good town where you can bike everywhere within 15 minutes. So for me, spending more money on myself wouldn't really increase my enjoyment of life. I would enjoy life much more if I can see that spending money on others by either donating to different charities or donating time to charity. And I realized that I probably want to spend more time donating my own time to work that currently isn't being financed, work that I find underappreciated. So I basically decided to live quite frugally under my expenses. So saving quite a lot of money by just not spending on myself. Of course, I try to eat healthy. I try to do sports, so I don't go to the extreme. Although compared to most of Swedish people, I'm considered quite extreme in trying to avoid eating out every day of the week, for example, or always cooking my own food rather than buying ready-made meal. But for me, I enjoy the food I cook, so it's not a big issue. And the food I like is easier for me to cook than to buy in a store. So basically, by doing this, I'm able to decrease my expenses. And if you're able to decrease your expenses, you don't have to save that much to be able to be financially independent, which is the FI in FIRE. And if you want, when you become financially independent, basically when you're able to save more than you make by investing it either by having a tenant or having multiple tenants or by investing it in other ways. For me, it's mostly the stock market. By doing that, you could basically live on the interest that you make. And then you could, rather than work with a high salary, aiming for a higher salary, you could work volunteer work where you don't necessarily need a salary, but rather you can do work that you think is more important than your current work or any work that you could get paid for. But then, of course, you would have to live even more frugally or have a lot of money saved up.
That sounds like a very nice introduction for the next episode. And before we finish off, I just want to mention that I recently also been thinking in ways like, okay, you want to own your time and not necessarily, sacrifice it too much in order to get money that you don't need to spend anyway. So basically like identify what you really want to achieve in your everyday experience and maybe cut out on expenses that ROI positive for you. For instance, like you can live in a much cheaper area like I do right now in Poland actually, and also to eat at home and sure to enjoy many other places without being particularly lavish, because I believe you 100% agree on that as well, Stenemo, that it's very important to like what you're doing all the time rather than buying stuff to impress people that you don't like.
Yes, very much so.
And with that, I just want to briefly summarize, because we went from my initial rant of work-life balance to Ikigai, and with some brief teaser of FIRE, financial independence, which I believe it will be the next topic for next week. But for now, I just want to have a brief synthesis. So I believe what we've covered up so far is like work-life balance. You have to be a little bit more specific when you want to assure that you have what you want to achieve in the long run, which is a sense of feeling that whatever you do positively impacting all other aspects of your life, and you don't feel like you're doing too much of one thing in excess and in return get too little of the other. So basically remains balanced. And also when it comes to activities in general, that you want to have a clear purpose, clear meaning, make sure that you want to get the impact out you wish. And lastly, to be mindful as well on how much you can live upon and what constitutes a meaningful life for you, and basically adjust the financial situation. So do you have any closing comments about what I previously said, if I've missed something critical?
No, I think that it's a good introduction of financial independence, retire early. And I think to retire early, to be mentioned that this is not really a retirement the way that the classic sit around in the sun and not do anything, because I think that's the worst way of spending your retirement.
Oh yeah. Yeah, just a very brief way before we close, like this is basically my weekends. I try to be idle, but then you get like agitated and want to do something else. So for some people it's activity all the way, but it's very important to choose the right activity. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening, from all the way from work-life balance to brief teaser to financial independence, and we correlated as well. And I want to thank you, Stenemo, for participating.
Thank you.